I woke to a world I didn't recognize. The first thing I noticed was the cold, sharp and unnatural, unlike anything I'd ever felt before. It wasn't the soothing cold of the cryo chamber that had enveloped me in a comforting promise of tomorrow. No. This was an intrusive, biting cold that crept into my bones and settled there, unyielding. My eyelids felt like they had been glued shut, and when I finally managed to pry them open, the dim light around me was disorienting. My body didn't respond the way it should have. Every joint screamed in protest, my muscles stiff and uncooperative. It felt as though I had been asleep for an eternity. And maybe I had been. I blinked, my vision slowly adjusting to the flickering light. Shadows danced on cracked walls, their shapes alien and unsettling. I remembered the pristine, sterile room I had entered before the procedure. Its glossy white surfaces, the soft hum of advanced machinery, the calm assurances of the technicians. This wasn't that room. I tried to move, but my legs gave out beneath me, and I crumbled onto the cold, damp floor. A sharp metallic scent filled my nostrils, mixing with the stale odor of decay. Something about it set my heart racing. My voice came out in a hoarse croak, unfamiliar and broken. "Hello," I managed, my words barely more than a whisper. There was no answer, only the faint hum of machinery and an occasional, irregular clanging sound in the distance. Fear began to worm its way into my chest. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence, rough and low. "You're awake." I startled. I turned my head sharply, wincing as a sharp pain shot through my neck. A man stood in the shadows, his figure gaunt and hunched. His face was illuminated by the faint flicker of a fire somewhere behind him. He looked nothing like the doctors or staff I had experienced to greet me. Instead, he was filthy, his face lined with exhaustion and hunger. "Where am I?" My voice was barely audible, cracking as though it hadn't been used in years. The man stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "The future," he said simply. "Not quite what you had in mind, huh?" The future? That word hit me like a tidal wave. Memories rushed back in fragmented flashes. The excitement of signing the cryonics contract, the speeches from the company executives about building a better tomorrow, the sterile chamber where I had willingly given up my present for the promise of something greater. How long? My question hung in the stale air, the weight of it palpable. The man's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Centuries," he said. "Maybe more. No one keeps track anymore." Centuries? My mind reeled, struggling to comprehend the enormity of it. I had expected to wake up to shining cities, floating cars and utopia. The best and brightest minds had promised as much. Instead, the world around me seemed fractured and hollow, a dim shadow of what it once was. "Where's the staff?" I asked, my voice shaking. "The scientists, the doctors." He chuckled, a bitter, humorless sound. "Gone. All of them. Civilization fell a long time ago. War, famine, disease. Take your pick. The world couldn't keep itself together. By the time you lot started waking up, there was nothing left for you to wake up to." I stared at him, his words sinking into my mind like shards of ice. "But this facility, It was supposed to be cutting edge, the best humanity had to offer. What happened to the promise of a better future? He shrugged, his gaze heavy. You've got it backwards. You thought you were preserving yourself for the future. Turns out, you were preserving yourself for the future. What do you mean? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. He didn't respond immediately, his silence more unnerving than his words. Finally, he said, "You'll see." The sounds of footsteps interrupted our conversation, and the man stepped back into the shadows. My heart began to race as two figures appeared, their faces hidden behind crude, patchwork masks made of metal and leather. They moved with purpose, their gazes locking onto me immediately. "Another one of them said, their voice muffled but laced with disinterest. "Looks intact." "What's going on?" I demanded, my panic rising. The man who had spoken to me earlier raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Don't fight it," he muttered. "You'll only make it worse." Before I could ask what he meant, the masked figures grabbed me. Their hands were rough, their grip unyielding as they hauled me to my feet. I tried to resist, but my body was too weak, my muscles too atrophied to put up any real fight. "Let me go!" I shouted, my voice trembling. "Do you know who I am? I'm Victor Ashworth. Save it," one of the masked figures interrupted, their tone flat. "No one cares who you were." Their words stung, cutting deeper than I wanted to admit. My protests turned into ragged breaths as they dragged me out of the room. The corridors they pulled me through were a far cry from the futuristic hallways I remembered. The walls were cracked and crumbling, lined with pipes that leaked foul-smelling fluids. I caught glimpses of other people through the bars of rusted doors. Some slumped motionless, others watching with hollow eyes. A few reached out feebly, their fingers trembling. They weren't the frozen elite I had once imagined I'd join in building a utopia. These were broken, defeated shells of humanity. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, dread clawing at my chest. The only response was a sharp tug, forcing me to stumble forward. Finally, they dragged me into a massive, dimly lit chamber. My breath caught as I took in the sight before me. The walls were lined with capsules like the one I had been in, most of them dark and cracked. A few were open, their contents spilling out like discarded garbage. And then I saw it. A body splayed across a grimly table, pale and frozen, its flesh carved like a butcher's price. "What the hell is this?" I whispered, my knees threatening to buckle. The masked figure beside me gave a dry, almost amused laugh. "Welcome to the future," they said. "You're going to be a big help to us." Their words echoed in my mind as I realized the horrifying truth. I had preserved myself for a world where I wasn't a pioneer or a visionary. I was food. They hauled me deeper into the chamber, past the rows of capsules and makeshift workstations littered with rusted tools. Every step closer to the table where the body lay intensified my dread. My stomach churned, not just from the sight but from the acrid stench that clung into the air. A sickly mix of decay and burning flesh. I don't belong here!" I shouted, my voice cracking as I struggled against their grip. "This isn't what I signed up for!" One of the masked figures snorted, their tones mocking. "What did you think that you signed up for then? Eternal glory? A hero's welcome?" "Yes," I spat, though my voice wavered. "I was promised a better world, one where my knowledge and resources would matter. The second figure, quieter and more methodical, looked at me with something almost like pity. "You're not the first to say that." They gestured to the capsules lining the walls. "And you won't be the last." I was shoved to my knees near the base of a platform where the corpse lay dissected. Up close, I could see the frosty sheen still clinging to parts of its skin, as if it hadn't yet fully thawed before being carved apart. The sight made bile rise in my throat. A voice rang out from behind me, calm, authoritative. "Enough!" I turned my head to see a figure stepping forward, flanked by two others. This one wasn't masked. His face was gaunt but sharp, his eyes cold and calculating. He carried himself with the air of someone used to being obeyed. "Who is he?" the man asked, nodding toward me. "Another one of my captors replied. "Still coherent. Looks like he came out clean." The man crouched in front of me, his piercing gaze locking onto mine. For a moment, he said nothing, studying me like I was some peculiar artifact he couldn't quite place. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice unsettlingly even. "Victor Ashworth," I said, forcing strength into my voice. "And I demand to know what's going on here." A flicker of something, amusement, crossed his face. "Demand," he repeated, his tone dripping with mockery. "You're in no position to demand anything, Victor Ashworth." I clenched my jaw, refusing to back down. "You don't understand. I was a titan in my time, a leader. I invested millions into this facility and its promise. I wasn't supposed to wake up to this." He leaned in closer, his breath cold against my face. "And yet, here you are, waking up into this. A world where your millions mean nothing, your leadership means nothing, and your name means nothing." I opened my mouth to retort, but he cut me off. "You want answers? Fine." He stood, gesturing broadly to the chamber around us. "This is survival, Victor. Pure and simple. The world you left behind is gone, buried under its own greed, arrogance, and rot. Whatever utopia you dreamed of never came to be." "But then why keep us here?" I demanded. "Why wake us at all if there's nothing left?" His eyes darkened. "Do you really need me to spell it out?" I didn't want to understand, but the truth was already clawing its way into my mind. The capsules, the body on the table, the way they spoke of me as a resource. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. You can't do this." "It's not personal," he said, almost kindly. "We use what we have, and you're a gift from the past. A resource that doesn't fight back, doesn't require maintenance, and provides exactly what we need to survive." Before I could process his words, a commotion erupted near the chamber's entrance. Shouts echoed down the corridor, followed by hurried footsteps. The leader stiffened, signaling to his men. "They're here!" someone hissed. "They?" I asked, my voice trembling. The leader glared at me. "You'll find out soon enough." The chaos that followed was a blur. The chamber erupted into violence as figures I hadn't seen before poured in, wielding makeshift weapons and wearing scavenged armor. They attacked with a ferocity that spoke of desperation, their battle cries reverberating in the confined space. In the confusion, my captors abandoned me, rushing to defend their territory. I scrambled to my feet, my legs shaking beneath me as I searched for any chance of escape. That's when I felt a hand grab my arm. "Come on!" I turned to see a wiry man with wild eyes and a ragged appearance. He wasn't one of the attackers or captors, but someone else entirely. Without waiting for my response, he yanked me toward a narrow passage on the far side of the chamber. Who are you? I demanded as we ran. Someone who doesn't want to see you end up on the table, he shot back. We darted through the darkened passage, the sound of battle fading behind us. My lungs burned, and every step sent jolts of pain through my unsteady body. But I forced myself to keep moving. Eventually, we emerged into a small hidden alcove lit by the faint glow of a dying fire. The man pushed me down onto a pile of rags that served as a crude seat. You're lucky I found you when I did, he said, crouching in front of me. Name's Elias. And you? Victor, I panted. Victor Ashworth. Elias frowned. Another one of the Cryolot, huh? I nodded weakly. They were going to kill me. Not just kill you, Elias said grimly. Harvest you. Use every piece of you they can. Because that's how they survive. You're meat to them, Victor. That's all you are. I stared at him, horror coursing through me. How can this be the future? How can this be what we've become? Elias let out a bitter laugh. You think this is bad? You haven't seen anything yet. The days that followed blurred together as Elias led me through the wasteland. The remnants of civilization were a patchwork of crumbling ruins and scavenged strongholds, each more desperate than the last. We avoided the hunters at all cost, but their presence was everywhere, always watching, always waiting. With every passing day, my hope dwindled. This wasn't the future I had sacrificed everything for. This was a nightmare, and I was trapped in it. Elias and I stumbled into a cavernous ruin, its walls lined with jagged metal beams that jutted out like broken ribs. The air was damp and heavy, carrying the faint smell of mildew and something acrid I couldn't place. I was exhausted, every step a monumental effort. But Elias pressed on, his determination unwavering. This place isn't safe, he muttered, scanning the shadows as we moved deeper into the labyrinth of rubble. Nothing's safe, I replied bitterly. Why keep running? It's only a matter of time before they catch us. Elias paused, turning to glare at me. You want to give up? Go ahead, lay down and wait for them to drag you back. But I'm not stopping. His words stung, but I couldn't argue. Giving up wasn't in my nature. Not in the life I'd left behind, and not now. We found a small alcove, shielded by a collapsed section of wall, and decided to rest. Elias crouched by a puddle of stagnant water, cupping his hands to drink. I watched him in silence, my thoughts a swirling mess. Do you ever think about what it was like before? I asked, my voice hollow. Elias scoffed. What good does that do? The past doesn't matter, only surviving the now does. But it shouldn't be this way, I said, my frustration boiling over. We had everything. Technology, resources, knowledge. We were supposed to build a future worth living in, not this. Elias sighed, leaning back against the wall. Maybe that was the problem. Too much arrogance. Too much trust in systems that were always going to fail. I opened my mouth to argue, but the sound of distant footsteps silenced me. Elias tensed, motioning for me to stay quiet. The footsteps grew louder, echoing through the cavern. Shadows danced on the walls as flickering lights approached. My heart pounded as I realized who it was. The hunters. We fled deeper into the ruins, the hunters' voices growing closer with every step. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but fear kept me moving. Elias led the way, navigating the maze of corridors with an instinct born of years in the desolate world. Faster, he hissed, glancing back at me. I tried to keep up, but my body betrayed me. I stumbled, crashing to the ground with a cry. Elias stopped, hesitating for a moment before doubling back to pull me to my feet. "They're too close," he said, his voice tinged with panic. I can't go any further," I panted. He gritted his teeth, his eyes darting toward the approaching lights. "Stay here," he said finally. "I'll draw them off." "What?" I gasped. You can't! Just stay out of sight," he snapped, cutting me off. "If you make it out of this, you owe me." Before I could protest further, he was gone, disappearing into the shadows. Moments later, I heard his voice echo through the ruins, taunting the hunters. Their lights veered away, chasing after him. For a brief moment, silence returned. I pressed myself against the cold stone wall, my heart hammering in my chest. Guilt and fear warred within me. Elias had risked his life for me, and now I was alone again. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. I didn't dare move, barely dared to breathe. But then, a sound broke the silence. Soft scrape of footsteps nearby. My stomach dropped. "Found you," a voice rasped, low and mocking. I turned to see one of the hunters emerging from the shadows, their mask glinting in the faint light. "No," I whispered, scrambling backward. They advanced slowly, savoring my terror. "You thought you could escape. You thought you were different." I tried to run, but they were too fast. Their hands closed around my arms, dragging me to my feet. I struggled, but my strength was nothing compared to theirs. "You'll fetch a good price," they said, almost casually. I screamed, fought, backed, but it didn't matter. They dragged me back through the ruins, their grip unrelenting. When we returned to the hunter's base, the sight of the dissected bodies hit me harder than it had the first time. Now, I understood the full horror of what was happening. The bodies weren't just resources. They were meant to sustain the remnants of humanity. I was thrown onto a metal table, my limbs bound with rough straps. The leader of the hunters loomed over me, his expression cold and detached. "You should have stayed frozen," he said, his voice devoid of pity. I thrashed against the restraints, my mind racing for some way out. You don't have to do this," I shouted. I can help you, I can..." "You've already helped," he interrupted, gesturing to the room around us. "Your kind made all this possible." The words struck me like a physical blow. My investments, my trust in progress, it had all led to this. The leader raised the blade, its edge glinting in the dim light. "No!" I screamed, my voice raw with desperation. But my pleas went unanswered. The world went dark. My final moments filled with the realization that my dream of the future had become a nightmare. I had preserved myself to escape death, only to wake in a world that consumed me, body and soul. And as I faded, I couldn't help but think, this was my legacy. A tragedy carved from arrogance and misplaced hope.